But anyway, thank you. Uh, this is fourth in this series of classes. I need to tell you, you'll see up here it says the traditional founding fathers. If you paid attention in school, you may have learned that all of the founding fathers were a bunch of Enlightenment deists. Not so. There were people on both traditional Christians and Enlightenment deists that were part of our founding fathers. The truth is that the ones you know the best, that had the most influence, they were the Enlightenment figures. And the ones you know the least were the traditional Christians. Am I saying that fairly?
I think that's fair.
Yeah. We've been compromising in 4 weeks to try and make sure we agree on some things. Anyway, this is, if you come today and you don't come next week, at least try and watch it on YouTube because James is televising these for us, so you can get the other side of the story. Because if you come home with just these people today, you won't get the whole picture. Okay, my joke of the week. Carla is crawling under the table. A Russian spy named Joe Smith was arrested by the American officials. They took him in the interrogation room and they said, "Drop the act, Smith. We know you're a spy." Smith said, "What? I'm a true blood American. I can name all 47 presidents and their vice presidents." It doesn't matter. I know you're a spy. He says, "But I know all the words of the Star-Spangled Banner and I can recite the Declaration of Independence." It doesn't matter. We know you're a spy. "Well, I know the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Constitution, and I can tell you all 10 Bill of Rights." Doesn't matter. We know you're a spy. "Well, how do you know that?" "We know that because Americans don't know any of those things." Now, Naomi Steyer, who isn't here today, sent me a joke because she thought that you were all like them. She didn't actually say that, but I thought that. And she said she had learned this week that, you farmers know this, that when you talk to the cows, they produce more milk. Did you know that? Yes, she said it's in one ear and out the other.
They don't.
Oh.
Yeah. Where are you going? Wrong way.
I'm going backwards. There we go. Okay. People we're going to talk about today. John Jay. Who knows who he is? Anybody know hear his name? Oh, a few of you. He's one of the founding fathers. John Adams. Anybody hear of him? Oh, more of you. Alexander Hamilton. And how many people only learned about him after the musical? Anyway, that's our focus for today, is these three. We'll try and get to a couple of others, but they're our focus. I want to remind you of a couple things first from our first class that we had. I want you to try to remember that only 17% of people in America in 1776 were church members, and only 40% were regular people in worship. So there weren't, your notion that everybody was Christian or faithful, not so. The majority of the country was not Christian. It was only after the 1800s and the Second Great Awakening with Barton Stone and the groups that created us started to increase the participation in church. And if you look at the chart, you'd see how that went up and up and up. Boy, this is sensitive today. However, we need to say at the same time that was a sense of Christian values. I'd call them cultural Christian values that were true for everybody. The majority of people would say, I'm a Protestant. They were actually anti-Catholic. They were very much opposed to the Catholics. When England got Canada from the French, there was a whole bunch of Catholics up there, and they passed one of the acts that was intolerable to the founders, called the Quebec Act, that said it was okay to be Roman Catholic. They were very upset about that. They had an idea, and we argued about this, of Republican motherhood. Now, those of you who are not feminists, those of you who are have a different perspective would say, like the material I read said, that women's place was in the home, taking care of the children. And if you would want to read Republican motherhood in a more generous way, it would be, that's Sue's point of view, you would say that they taught the children basic Christian values, which they did. That was their basic role. Actually, Christian women, or actually the women played a major role in the coming up of the revolution, because they organized the boycott of all the English goods. And that's when they had big sewing bees or spinning bees to make wool so that they could make homemade wool spun clothing, because they weren't importing anything. So despite the fact that they weren't going to church and they weren't church members, they saw themselves as Christians, as Protestants.
Well, churches, there wasn't like there was a church on every corner.
There would not been as many churches, especially in the more frontier regions. But in the cities, there were plenty of churches. Okay? They also would say some things that you don't think are very Christian, which were part of the culture. They believed very strongly in ghosts, witches, demons, and in slavery. They actually looked at those passages in the Bible that say, slaves, obey your master, and other passages that justify slavery. So, those things. Anyway, we're ready for Sue to teach you something.
Thank you. So I am going to talk about John Jay today. He's sometimes referred to as a forgotten founding father. Of all the founding fathers out there that we can think about, John Jay perhaps held the most high offices of any of our founding fathers. So although he may have been forgotten by us, he was not inconsequential. He was born to a wealthy family, a trading family. He was of French Huguenot descent. His father was born in New York City. He was a trader of furs and wheat and timber, those kind of stock goods that would be sent over to England for processing. His family was Anglican. Eventually they transitioned to be Episcopalian as the Anglican, let's say, religion petered out. This is his childhood home in Rye, New York. John Jay was about 3 months old when they moved here. He was educated at home by his mother, which was not uncommon. Most mothers would educate their children in basic grammar, handwriting, moral values. But eventually, John Jay was sent to study with Pierre Stoup, who was a Huguenot, who had turned Anglican, had become an Anglican priest. And that was not uncommon for prominent families like the Jays to send their sons to get further education in classical education. And by that, we mean to read the classics. He would have read Homer. He would have read Virgil. He would have read Plato. He would have studied ancient Greek and Roman history in order to understand and then apply that to his world. He would have received Anglican instruction and moral formation that would have been typical in the colonial world. When he returned home again, he was still further educated by his mother until he was sent to college at the age of 14. A little bit young, but not really unusual for somebody so precocious as John Jay. He would have gone to King's College, which is now known as Columbia University in New York City. So while he was at King's College, he made some influential friends, one of which was one of his best friends, would eventually become his law partner, Robert Livingston. This man also did the oath of office for President George Washington when he was inaugurated. We'll hear about him again too. So some of the things that John Jay should be known for, or is known for, is being the secretary of the New York Committee of 50. You know, when Britain closed down the Boston Harbor, there was a movement throughout all the colonies, including New York, as to how to respond to this. And the Committee of 50 was chosen to formulate New York's response. Now, it was made up of both people who were rather radical in their viewpoint and the more moderate, because New York itself was somewhat divided as to how we should respond. John Jay represented the more moderate kind of temperament. So he served as the secretary of this committee. And it all happened in Francis Tavern. You can see that right up here. Francis Tavern is in New York City. You can still go there to visit. I would recommend it. It's the place where the Sons of Liberty would meet, not just this Committee of 50. It's also where George Washington gathered his officers together and bid them a fond farewell as he resigned his commission, saying, "It is with a full heart and with love and gratitude that I leave you." So it's worth going there. John Jay was a delegate to the First Continental Congress. So as a delegate, he was on the side of the people who wanted a reconciliation with Parliament, at least initially. He was more moderate, as I said, but events started unfolding. The burning of Norfolk, Virginia, started to turn his attention away from reconciliation and more toward the Patriots' point of view. And as the events continued to unfold, he began to feel himself leaning toward and then being actually pushed toward the revolutionary side of things. By the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, John Jay was firmly on the side of independence. He did all he could to influence the people of New York to also join that side of the argument. When it came to ending the revolution, John Jay was one of 5 people who were chosen to go to Paris to negotiate the Treaty of Paris that ended the revolution. You can see him here. We talked about this painting before, about how it's unfinished because the Brits didn't want to sit for they felt it was too humiliating for them to sit for the portrait. But you can see him here. He's the first one on your far left. That's John Jay, followed by Benjamin Franklin. Well, maybe I should look. John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, Adams, Henry Lawrence, and who have I forgotten? George. No, that's William. That's actually William Temple Franklin, who was the nephew, I believe, of Benjamin Franklin, who was acting as secretary. I've missed one. Anyway, he was chosen, John Jay was chosen to be on this peace commission, as they called it, because of his diplomatic experience. He had served as a diplomat in Spain. He also had a reputation for high integrity, and he had a sharp legal mind and keen negotiating skills. So by far, though, his most important contribution to this Treaty of Paris negotiation was his insistence that the Commission negotiate directly with Britain. France would have much preferred if the United States delegates had negotiated through them. However, being a keen foreign policy mind, John Jay recognized that France was not entirely in line with our interests. They were encouraging the Spanish to maintain their hold on some of the lands out in the western part of what would become the United States. France actually would have preferred a weaker United States than we wanted to establish. And he finally realized that Britain was indeed willing to negotiate directly with us. So despite what Congress had tasked him to do, John Jay insisted that we negotiate directly with the Britons. It was a risky move, but made all the difference in our future. He's also known that, there was that awkward period in between the end of the Revolution and the founding of the writing of the Constitution, that Articles of Confederation that I said did not really work. There was that awkward period in there. And John Jay was busy during that time. He, along with Hamilton and Adams, wrote what are called the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers are you can think of them as pamphlets or broadsides, which explained all of the reasons why the Articles of Confederation were not working out and really where we needed to go. They were kind of like a roadmap for where these folks believed we needed to be. We weren't there yet. John Jay's contribution was, I don't want to say minimal, but he was stricken by a bout of rheumatism after he had written 5 of the 25 essays that he was assigned, and he couldn't continue. So Hamilton took over from there and contributed the bulk of it. But John Jay's contribution was more strategic in nature. It didn't stop him from having opinions, apparently. He was a strong advocate and made sure that the papers reflected his advocacy for a national unity, because without that unity, he knew that foreign powers would divide and conquer the states if they tried to continue to operate very individually. He also knew that we needed a strong reputation in order to be able to negotiate treaties. And he was insistent that the Senate take a role in those negotiations, recognizing that the president, the executive branch, and the Senate together would be more formidable. So what John Jay is actually best known for is being the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's where most of us, if any of us, would remember him. That would be what he would be remembered for. He was nominated by George Washington to be that first Chief Justice and was unanimously confirmed by the Senate. He had a rather light docket, though. The Supreme Court only addressed 4 cases in 6 years. So it left him with a little time. Yeah. Yeah, really. Actually, they did spend quite a bit of time putting together rules and procedures that would be used into the future. They also spent time, I never knew this. This is part of the reason why this has been so fascinating to me. I keep learning. They also spent time riding the circuit. You know, circuit courts? You know why they're called circuit courts? Because they were on a circuit where judges would ride from one to the other, including the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who would ride the circuit. So he spent time doing that. But he did have some time left over, and he was active in Washington's administration. One thing that you may have heard of, or that he's known for, is the Jay Treaty. The Jay Treaty was a treaty that he negotiated with the British. It probably averted a reemergence of the war, or a second war. It normalized trade to some extent with the British, and it infuriated the French, not surprisingly. It also made the South very unhappy because the North, obviously having more manufacturing and trading ports, were the beneficiaries of that normalization of trade. The South still had plenty of debt left from the war. They still had plenty of work to be done, but they got very little of the benefit from this trade. And in order to get the treaty passed, Jay had to drop one of the provisions that they were looking most forward to, which was that they would be reimbursed or have restitution for slaves that the British had taken or enrolled in their army and moved to other parts of the country, leaving them without their property. So that was dropped, and it made the South furious. As a matter of fact, John Jay quipped that he could travel from Boston to Philadelphia at night simply by the light of his effigies being burned. So his final, let's say, or his last major job in government was as the governor of New York. He was elected as the second governor of New York. And during his tenure, he enacted a law for the gradual emancipation of all slaves in New York. The act provided that all children born to parents of slaves would be freed, and that exports of slaves from New York would be prohibited. So you couldn't, ship your slaves off to your sister-in-law's house in order to avoid this law. So these children that had been born within the slave society were to serve a number of years. It wasn't immediate. Male children would serve till they were 28. Women would serve until they were 25. And it also failed to free the people who were already enslaved, born and enslaved at the time of enactment. However, by July 4th, 1827, all New York slaves had been freed. Now, as Fred mentioned, slaveholding was ingrained in the colonial society, and the Jays were not completely innocent. The Jay family had a significant role in the slave trade. They bought, they sold. Jay himself was known to have purchased, owned, rented out, and manumitted at least 17 slaves. Manumitted, that's the new word of the day for me. Anybody know what it means? It's when you buy a slave and set them free. However, John Jay, having bought his slaves, waited until he felt like they had done enough service to reimburse him, until he got his return on investment, if you will, before he set them free. And despite being the founder of the New York Manumission Society, Jay is known to have owned slaves between 1790 and 1800, and in fact, freed all but one by the 1810 census. Was there a Mrs. J? Yes. I don't know. I didn't look into that part of it.
I've got the religious part of this guy. This is the church he grew up in. Now, this is not the building, but it is the building today that you can go visit. He was a warden in this church. Now, that is like being a trustee around here, in case you wonder what church warden is. But they did have a couple of additional jobs. They had to negotiate with the preacher over what the rules were going to be in their congregation. And they were also required to keep the peace in the congregation. That was part of their official roles. But he was in this church his whole life. We also know of his Christian convictions because he was the president of the American Bible Society. Very early on, the Bible Society was formed. It's now down in Baltimore, the office is, to try and place Bibles as much as possible around the world and around the country. So he was very, very much involved in the American Bible Society. As Sue mentioned, he grew up, his family started as Huguenots. Who knows what that means? Anybody? means they were the Protestants in the southern part of France. Now, what's France religiously? Roman Catholic. So they were persecuted in France, and his ancestors escaped to England, and that's when they became Anglicans. If you want a defense of Christianity, he actually wrote and said, look, I can prove that Christianity is true. If you need, I'm not sure it'd hold up today, but there it is, you can get it. Here's some quotes from John Jay. We must all go home to be happy, and our home is not of this world. Christianity is designed to take away our hearts of stone and soften them of rudeness and arrogance. I don't know whether that's still working or not, but we'll find. No society has ever been able to maintain order and freedom apart from the morals of the Christian religion. Now, there are no real monuments to John Jay. He does have a college and a law school and a couple of statues, and that's his cemetery plot there in New York. We're ready to move on, Sue. I think that's you, isn't it?
Yep, it's me. This is me. So we're going to talk about John Adams a little bit. John Adams is the second president of the United States. He thought of himself first and foremost always as a farmer. And I love this about him. I mean, doesn't he kind of look like a farmer? I mean, I can almost envision him in coveralls, with that little streak of boy. It makes me want to sing a couple verses of Old MacDonald almost. But he was also a lawyer. He was a Puritan. Do you know what a Puritan is? Well, H.L. Mencken tells us a Puritan is someone who is desperately afraid that somebody, somewhere, might be happy. All right, it's not really all that bad, but Puritans are known for their moral discipline, their piety, their sense of duty, their strict moral discipline. Their theology involves predestination. They're Calvinists. They tend toward plainness and humility. And did I mention strict moral discipline? You get it, right? So he was a Puritan and influenced by that, but he was not your standard run-of-the-mill Puritan. He was also assertive and loud. He was stubborn and quite vain. He was an abolitionist. He did have that strong moral compass. He was very legacy-focused. He had an explosive temper. He was very bright, but difficult to work with. So in his youth, John Adams was born in Braintree, Massachusetts. His father was a deacon of the local church. To be a Puritan deacon in colonial New England meant holding one of the most highly respected positions in the community. It was not just a position of respect, it also carried some responsibility for your congregation's spiritual needs. So a deacon was not clergy, but he was the guardian of the spiritual order of the congregation, also the guardian of material resources, and he was a moral example to his congregation. John's father filled all of these roles beautifully. He embodied good Puritan values. So John, however, was just a boy and tended to get into trouble every once in a while. He went to school. He had the advantage of classical training. He read those classics, even as a young man. Often they did not. But he was bored. He didn't like it. He'd rather skip school and go hunting or fishing. Inevitably, Daddy found out. It was not good. So John's father says, I'll teach this young man a lesson. He put him to work on the farm. He was clearing fence rows, mucking stalls, feeding the hogs, slopping the hogs, working in the fields. He kept him at it for a couple of good weeks and then said, "Now, John, what do you think?" John says, "I love it. I want to be a farmer." Well, John's father was not having any of this. He shipped him off to Harvard.
That house that she had back
Oh.
there, if you'd like to see one that looks just like it, go over to Spring Valley, all the way to the back. And there's a New England style house with those little tiny windows and those brown sideboards back there. Matter of fact, some of you may remember a young couple that was in our church. She worked at Grove, and they owned that house. And her husband was the child care worker, and they put up he had somebody put up lights at Christmas for him, and it was covered with lights back there.
Worth a trip. So off to Harvard he goes. At Harvard, John's father hoped he would study and become a member of the clergy. Think that worked out? No. So John recognizes that he has inherited his explosive temper from his mother, and it's not getting better. I mean, apparently when he unleashed, it was spectacular. I mean, maniacal rage came into the picture. So he studies the law, not something we would expect of a good Puritan boy, but he studies the law because he recognizes that it gives him balance. It smooths his temper. It gives him a way to think through problems and to perhaps even argue them out to resolution and maybe even winning, whereas his temper only digs him deeper into the issue. He becomes a lawyer. But before, it was hard for him. I mean, his father was not too pleased. And before he could actually settle into his law practice, he took a position as a schoolmaster, which I kind of love this, because he was okay with teaching children. He liked children. He was okay with teaching them, but really what he liked better was observing them. And so he wrote down all of his observations about his pupils, his young pupils. And it kind of reminds me of where he's going in life, of his presidency to be. He said, "I sit in my great chair and I envision myself as the leader of a great commonwealth. And here I can discover all of the great geniuses in miniature. I have several renowned generals. They are only 3 feet tall. I have several deep and projecting politicians. They are in petticoats. I have several who are catching and dissecting flies, accumulating great and remarkable pebbles with all the ardent curiosity of any scientist at the Royal Academy." So he enjoyed his time, but this was not going to be his full-time profession. Who can tell me, just with a raise of hands, who can tell me a few accomplishments of John Adams? Yep, that's it. You kind of get it. Let's take a look at John Adams' life, because that's kind of what you're going to find out. He was a revolutionary man. He had settled into a rather mundane law practice. He was dealing with inheritance issues, contracts, property disputes. All was kind of going as expected until the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act incensed him because now it is impacting him personally. And when John's incensed, it's not good. So the Stamp Act put a tax on virtually all correspondence. That's what lawyers deal in. Think of it as almost anything except for your personal correspondence can now be taxed. So he becomes, in that one little move, a revolutionary. He starts fighting against that Stamp Act. Well, he wasn't the only one. There were also other people who were not happy about this tax. It was a first direct tax on the colonists. And what happened was that people would kind of get together in their mobs and they'd start trouble, let's say. And it happened in Boston too. There was this one lonely soldier standing out in front of the customs house. and he starts getting jeered by this mob. And the jeers slowly turn to snowballs, and then chunks of ice, and then rocks, and bits of wood. And his compatriots come out, about 8 more folks come out to kind of back him up. Things are not looking pretty. And all of a sudden, shots are fired. And we know it as the Boston Massacre. This picture up here is done by Paul Revere. It basically shows the colonists being slaughtered. That's the picture that they wanted us to see. It's unclear who made that first shot. It's unclear who was actually at fault in starting this fight, although we know who was jeering first. But when it came time for trial, nobody wanted to represent these poor guys. The only one who would represent them was John Adams. John Adams did represent them. It's probably his most courageous political act in his career. He managed to get all of them off from murder. Six of them, I think, got off completely scot-free. 2 were accused of manslaughter, a lesser charge, not murder. And for this, they were tattooed on their thumbs. So all told, it was probably as best he could do. But he still managed to be a revolutionary while he was doing it. He basically said, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been aggravating us by quartering your troops and enacting the Stamp Act. He became, based on this success, a representative to the First Continental Congress. The Boston Massacre trial just kind of like catapulted him in, but his skill as an orator got him into the Second Continental Congress. In 1776, he convinces Washington that what we need coming out of this Second Continental Congress is a statement of independence, just in case. They didn't call it the Declaration of Independence. What he's saying is, just in case, I see which way the winds are blowing. It looks like independence. Just in case, we need to have this in our back pocket so that when the votes are taken, we can say, here's what we're thinking. So Adams pushes Jefferson, who is one of the 5 members of the committee to write this statement, to actually do the first draft. Jefferson's the youngest, the junior member of the committee. He's from Virginia, which is a delegation that they desperately need support from. He's of the elite class, another group that they want to make sure is in their pocket, and he writes well. So he pushes Jefferson as the junior member to do the first rough draft. Well, as we all know, Jefferson toiled over it. It turned out pretty well. And years later, John Adams looks at this and sees that Jefferson is getting all the accolades as the author of the Declaration of Independence. It was his idea. He's beside himself. He's so ticked he didn't write his own first rough draft. His legacy. That's John Adams for you. So as I said, he was a gifted orator. He advocated for independence in those continental congresses. He nominated George Washington to be the war leader. He made the initial draft of the Declaration happen. Sounds like the perfect person for convincing others, doesn't it? I think we have a diplomat. Not. It turns out that Adams' diplomatic career was hampered by his rather independent and blunt temperament. He went to France to try to help with negotiating that alliance with France to end, to help us out at the Revolutionary War. Turns out by the time he got there, Ben Franklin was already done, so he was kind of pushed to the sidelines. Besides, while he's there, though, he does manage to say something to the French ministers about how exactly they're happening and ticks them off, and all communication pretty much shuts down. Nonetheless, he gets sent back to negotiate the Treaty of Paris. That went fairly well. The Treaty of Paris did happen, obviously. But soon thereafter, they sent him to Netherlands to be a diplomat in the Netherlands, more to get him out of France than anything. He was successful in negotiating a $2 million loan to the US, which was much needed capital at the time. But after that, they sent him to Britain. challenging position, to say the least, in the court of St. James, because already things were not going well, right? I mean, we just separated from them. So the British ministry gave Adams kind of the cold shoulder. He got offended. Things ground pretty much to a halt. However, when the first election was held and George Washington was elected, they felt it only fair to, well, the Constitution says you have to have at least two people running. They had George from the South, so John from the North was running against him. John became the second president. He pretty much figured that was his due. You know, he was the second guy that he ran against George the first time, but he only won by 71 electoral votes, as opposed to Jefferson, who received 68. He did not expect this. He thought he was going to be whisked right in. So even his presidency was kind of starting off a little bit disappointed. During his presidency, there was this thing that happened that called the XYZ affair. What happened is the president sent 3 delegates over to France to kind of negotiate with them because France was getting a little irritated that we were becoming so chummy with Britain. So they sent these delegates over to talk to the French foreign minister, who refused to see him. Instead, he sent 3 of his own delegates. They will be called X, Y, and Z in the report, who refused to talk to these delegates because they wanted a bribe. They wanted $250,000 right off the cuff before we can even talk. Oh yeah, and about $10 million in loans from the US to France. Well, the delegates refused to negotiate. They walked away from the negotiation table and sent a letter home. The letter arrived, and the Jeffersonian Republicans were sure it was a plot. They were sure that this was just a ploy to make the French look bad. The French was who they were siding with. So they had that letter, that report read in front of Congress, and it turns out that they were right, that there was requests for bribes and loans, and the Jeffersonian Republicans were embarrassed because they hadn't read the letter first. This is the beginning of the souring relationship between Jefferson and Adams. Another thing that happens is kind of an undeclared war where the ships down in the Caribbean are being overtaken by the French. He does manage to negotiate, this is a high point, he managed to negotiate an end to that undeclared war. But things are not going well in general, and the Aliens and Sedition Act comes up. This is an act that was undoubtedly unconstitutional. John Adams didn't ask for it, he didn't campaign for it, he wasn't prompted, he didn't prompt anything for it, but he did sign it. And the Aliens and Sedition Act was put in place because they were afraid that these people who were coming over from France and other countries were bringing revolutionary ideas. We just did this, we don't want to do it again so soon. And that the newspapers were backing them up, and that things were just not going well for the government. So the Aliens and Sedition Act was signed into law. Here's a comic, a political cartoon of the day. The big snake is the Aliens and Sedition Act. The 3 little boys there are honest opinion, freedom of speech, and the free press. So you can see how many people felt about that Aliens and Sedition Act.
That's his house. You can go to it today. Beautiful house for both him and his son. Anybody know who his son is? John Quincy Adams, who was also a president. He and George Bush are the only 2 that I think of. There's a beautiful lady and nice little girl in the garden. Anybody know who that is?
Debbie.
She's sitting here. This is his burial spot at the United Parish church. Now, the interesting thing about Adams's religion is that he changed more than anybody else over time, and his whole church had his transition. He changed from a Puritan to a Unitarian. Now, we have to ask what that is. Who knows tulip? Christian Ayers, I taught this to you once. You've forgotten it already.
Uh-oh.
Oh, former Presbyterians, put your hand up. Oh, don't be afraid. Tulip was the Reformation theology of John Calvin. Now, we're not talking about Luther, which is far softer. Calvin's approach was very harsh and disciplined, and it was based on these 5 principles. Tulip, total depravity of man. Every one of you people are depraved. You're all sinners. You have fallen short of the glory of God. I want to tell you, I only have to look at you, and I can see that you are depraved. However, to know goodness of your own, God decided which ones of you would be saved. So, Carla, I have good news. You're in. Carol, I'm awful sorry, but you're not. Unconditional election. You don't choose. You don't say, I believe in Jesus Christ. God decides that you're in and you're out. Unconditional election. The atonement of Jesus. You know what atonement is? Fancy 25-cent word theologians use. The sacrifice of Christ. Somebody had to pay for your depravity to balance the scales. So Christ came to die for your sin, but only for Carla's, not for Carol's. Limited atonement. Irresistible grace. Carla, you just can't resist it. God has decided, and you are graced. Doesn't matter what you think. It's irresistible.
So I'm graced so I can listen to more of your jokes.
That's right. And not only that, if you do happen to slip up, there will be a perseverance of you as a saint. So it doesn't matter. You are in. You're among the elect. Now, interesting thing is, they were very moral folks. Why? Why, if only some of you get saved, why would you all try to be righteous and come to church and even come to Sunday school?
You don't know who.
Because you want the other people here to think you're part of the elect, even if you're not. Because this is a very judgmental Puritanism. That's where that notion of Puritan gets the idea. You know, Puritan. You think of Puritan, you think of somebody that's kind of prudish, that thinks, okay, you got to be this and that and that.
Strict moral code.
That's the notion. Well, anyway, John Adams and his whole church, over time, became Unitarians. Now, what's that difference? What does that mean, that you're a Unitarian? Well, it means that there is only one God. This Trinity stuff, I don't even know what that's about. God is God. Jesus, well, he's a special human being, but the divine parts of him are not very important. It's the stories that he has and his moral authority. He gives you the way you should live. And your logic, it comes from that interpretation that you make of Scripture. And how do you do that? Through logic and reason. How do you do it if you're a Puritan? By having faith that you're one of the elect. If you are John Adams as a Unitarian, you say, look, I have to defend my faith in a reasonable way. So today, the Unitarians, they united with another group of Christians called the Universalists. They're the people that say, everybody is saved. God loves you all so much that no matter what you do, you got to be saved. Okay? So they came together, and they sometimes call themselves the UUs. Now, I'm a little more sacrilegious, and if you're friendly enough to me as a Unitarian, I just call you a yo-yo. But anyway, Adams made that change with his church. And he wrote that over into his political theology and his political ideas. He thought, look, civil religion is very important. And you need to be a good citizen. If God is God, you are called to be a good citizen, a good person. And so he thought that needed to be a part of the Republic ideology. He thought you needed to respect democracy. When the majority decided something, you said, okay, I'll go along until we have the next election. If you lost, you said, okay, I'll have another chance next time. His qualities like sobriety, punctualism, self-discipline, thrift, they were all essential values. My own assessment is that he struggled with his skepticism about the way the church acted, because he really criticized ministers, because he thought what we did was we held our faith over you and pounded it into you. And some people would say he was a deist, but he doesn't really fit that category. So he's a kind of mix of the Puritan, Calvinism, skeptic, I would call him a Christian deist myself. David McCullough, anybody read McCullough? Wonderful historian. He says, Adams was both a devout Christian and an independent thinker, and saw no conflict in that. Some called him a deist, others called him a Christian. He believed that regular church service was beneficial to man's moral sense. Faith for him was more about what you did than what you said. What you did. We still talk about that. Walk the walk, not talk the talk. Some Adams quotes. Christian faith, as I understand it, is the best. Doesn't say it's the only one, it's okay, but it's the best. Without religion, this world would be something not fit to be mentioned in polite company. In other words, hell. There is no memorial to John Adams in the Capitol. There's one building of the Library of Congress named for him. There's actually a commission, a bunch of people really trying to get a memorial to good old John, but he's not there. I like
Story of his life.
Quincy bronze the best, because I think the other ones don't show him as he really is, because he was short, fat, and pudgy. Like me.
I'm afraid my watch isn't working. How's our time coming? Yes, Carolyn.
I just want to point out, John's wife, Abigail, when, during the Continental Congress, when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, and when the Constitution was being formed and stuff, she wrote to him and said, please
Sue,
don't forget the women.
we have to go quick.
Yes, she did. Abigail Adams that was a marriage of intellectual equals, if you will. Wasn't always the case, but Abigail Adams was known to be as well-read as John Adams, and certainly one of his helpmate. So we're running short on time, so I'm going to talk quickly about Alexander Hamilton. I have a love-hate relationship with Mr. Hamilton, but we'll try to just hit the love part. He was perhaps best known for being on the $10 bill. That's how most of us know him. I love him because he virtually single-handedly laid out the architecture for the American economy. He was a man who was wise beyond his years, we think. It's hard to tell because we're not sure how old he is. But when he sat down and analyzed something and put it to writing, he was a genius. When he stood up and spoke off the cuff, he was a disaster. Most of us, he was never a president, he worked behind the scenes. Most of us probably, we wouldn't have included him in this class until the musical. How many people saw it on stage? How many people saw it on Disney Plus? Adam Hamilton went almost instantly from being one of the least recognized founding fathers to being one of the most recognized.
I was in the line to get my COVID shot. Somebody offered me tickets to Hamilton, and I said, I'm not giving up my shot. That's a song from
Song from Hamilton, the musical. So do you want me to talk about this real quick, or do you want? So this is Hamilton's birthplace on the island of Nevis in the West Indies. It's in the southern part of the Caribbean. Remember, the West Indies were among the richest area of the country, and that's where Hamilton was born. He was born to Rachel Fawcett Lavienne. She gets a bum deal in history. Some people think she was a prostitute. Some people think that she was biracial. She was not. She was an heiress. The problem was that her mother married her off at 16 to a gold digger, John Michael Lavienne. And he was not only physically, but he was emotionally abusive. By the time they were married, quickly had a son named Peter. By the time they'd been married 5 years, she decided she could no longer live with him. This constituted desertion, for which John Michael had her imprisoned for 2 to 3 years. When she got out, she took off. She moved to Nevis, and there she met James Hamilton. At best, you would call him unsuccessful. He was a trader. He was in the trading business. At worst, you might call him a ne'er-do-well. But that's who she decides she's in love with. And she and James have 2 boys. They have James Jr. and Alexander. By age 11, his mother let me say that he is educated. His mother is an heiress and educated. He is educated in the classical thought process, but by a Jewish schoolmistress. So we're not sure about how much Christian upbringing he has. But by the age of 11, his mother has died, and he later describes her leaving a snug inheritance, but not to him. It goes to Peter, the son from the first marriage. He gets what he considers the next most valuable thing in their house, and that is 34 books. So by the age of 13, he's been apprentice to a trading company, Beekman and Kruger. He's a clerk, but he's bright and he's hardworking. He works his way up through the clerk ranks. He's still a clerk. But at age 17, he's witness to one of the worst hurricanes to hit probably ever still in the West Indies. And he writes about it to his father. That letter falls into the hands of a gentleman who enjoyed it, who shared it with another gentleman who thought it entertaining. Anyway, it winds up being printed in the local newspaper. And here you can see some of the quotes. He says, "Good God, what horror and destruction. O impotent, presumptuous fool, how durst thou offend the omnipotence? Learn to know and thy best support despite thyself, and adore thy God. So we know he had some Christian upbringing, some Christian foundation, but that's about as far as we can find his Christian foundation. Well, the locals are very impressed. They take up a collection. They know that Nevis is not, it's not a very big island. It's not the place to get a good education. They send him to New York. There he enrolls in King's College. It will become Columbia University. He sold cargo while he's there to support himself, but he immediately becomes interested in the revolutionary cause. He writes pamphlets, and in fact, as the war nears, he gets his college buddies together and they form a militia unit. And they go off and they sign up for the war in the militia unit, in the militia. That's how you did it back in those days. And he never returns to college. However, he does wind up as the aide-de-camp to George Washington. The aide-de-camp is kind of like, well, it wasn't official, but kind of like chief of staff. He deals with all of George's personal writings, all of his office paperwork. He pushes paper. He's really good at it. He's got the training being a clerk. He also is obviously gifted in finance. He's intimately involved in procuring the supplies that our Revolutionary Army so desperately needed. This is a picture of him at about age 25, we think. We're not sure, because when he got to King's College, he was maybe 17, maybe pushing 18. He knew he was kind of old for the gig at the time, so he changed his birth date. So we think, though, that he was actually about 25 years old around this when this was painted, and it's a calculated portrait. He knows that if you're going to be a gentleman, you have to represent a gentleman, and all gentlemen have their portraits. So it's about this time that he's an aide-de-camp. He wants his day of glory in the Army, and he marries Elizabeth Schuyler, who is the daughter of one of the most powerful traders in New York. He's marrying up, that age-old tradition of marrying up. That positions him to represent the U.S. in the Constitutional Convention. So at the convention, he stands up and gives perhaps the longest speech of the whole convention, and it's a disaster. Remember me saying he's not good talking up top? He admits that he really would like to see the country adopt kind of a type of a monarchy, maybe an elected monarchy. He doesn't really think state governments are necessary. You know, maybe they should just be abolished altogether. This did not go over well. As a matter of fact, things were not going well at all in the Constitutional Convention, and Benjamin Franklin suggested perhaps we should bring some chaplain in, we should have some prayer to try to get past this. And Hamilton's remark to that is, why should we bring in foreign aid at this point? So, all right. He eventually becomes the Secretary of the Treasury. I find this whole chapter of his life endlessly fascinating because that's my jam. You probably won't. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. But suffice it to say that as the Secretary of the Treasury, he put together the basics of our American economy, including a national bank, something that had never existed in the US before, no banks. Britain didn't allow banks in the colonies. So banking becomes a thing in America. He believes in a strong federal government, and he believes that the wealth and the power should be consolidated, that wealthy people are best suited to making the critical decisions for our country. He's not what you would call a democratically minded man. This is the love-hate, this is the hate part of it. He does not believe in democracy. When he uses the word, he's probably using it derisively. He also puts together a mint and establishes the basics for our economy as we know it today. The only home that Alexander Hamilton ever owned, he bought as he was leaving government. He had made his mark in the world. He had a little bit of funds. This is Hamilton Grange. Remember, he is from Scots descent. His father was the fourth son of a Scotch laird of the Grange. That got you nothing when you're the fourth son. But he names his own home after Hamilton Grange. And you can see it now. It's in New York in Harlem. You can go there and visit it. Oh, I had one more. Wait. We need to get past the duels. So his oldest son, Philip, died in a duel in 1901. This was a turning point in Hamilton's life. He found solace in Christianity when his son had died. He was also highly anxious about what he was doing, the state of the American economy and the government, and he found solace there also in Christianity. So this is a very poignant and transformational point in Hamilton's life when his son dies in 1901. Ironically, 1801, did I say 1801. Ironically, in 1804, he is called out by the sitting vice president, Aaron Burr, Jefferson's vice president, to a duel. His son had been killed, defending his father's honor, and now he's been called out again to defend his own honor. He borrows a set of dueling pistols from a friend. Ironically, it's the same pistols that killed his son. He goes across the Hudson River to Weehawken, New Jersey, where dueling is kind of looked upon, they ignore it a little bit more. And he fights a duel with Aaron Burr. It's unclear whether he deloped, that's another new word. Deloping is when you shoot the gun into the air without the intention of ever actually hitting your opponent. He may have done that. He may have just been a lousy shot. His gun may have misfired. In the rules, the Code of Honor says that if that happens, you stand and take it. But the end result is that he's shot in the abdomen by Aaron Burr. He's bleeding profusely and partially paralyzed when he's rowed back across the Hudson River. He lives another 32 hours before he dies after seeing his wife and children. Now, I just want to quote his letter to his wife, because I think it is a beautiful example of his faith. He starts it saying, "This letter, my very dear Eliza, will not be delivered to you unless I shall have terminated my earthly career to begin, as I humbly hope, from redeeming grace and divine mercy, a happily immortal one beyond." And it ends with, the consolations of religion, my beloved, can alone support you, and these you have the right to enjoy. Fly to the bosom of your God, be comforted. With my last idea, I shall cherish the sweet hope of meeting you in a better world. Adieu, the best of wives and the best of women. Embrace all my darling children for me. Ever yours, A.H. I think Alexander Hamilton's conversion was complete.
We could also, we're not going to, talk about Patrick Henry, very faithful Christian all his life. We could talk about Sam Adams, very faithful Christian all of his life. He was the guy who really was the propagandist who got everybody wrapped up in the revolution. We could talk about all of these signers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all Christian followers, faithful Christian people. But the people you know, the people you remember, Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, were all Enlightenment figures. We're going to talk about them next week. See you then, I hope.